For over a decade, he was pretty much the world's most wanted man. A ghost, really. Someone who commanded a massive narco empire from deep in the shadows and literally turned parts of Mexico into a full-blown war zone. His name? Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, better known as El Mencho. And the big news today is that after all these years, after eluding capture time and time again, the ghost has finally been caught.
$10 million. Just let that sink in for a second. That was the price on this guy's head. And look, that's not just some standard bounty. A number that high is basically a declaration from governments around the world saying, this isn't just a criminal we're after. This is a threat to national security. This is the guy who plunged an entire country into a brand new, terrifying kind of conflict. And for the better part of a decade, he was exactly that, a ghost. I mean, he built this multi-billion-dollar enterprise from way out in the remote mountains of the Sierra Madre, orchestrating a global network, all while remaining completely invisible. He was a phantom, this totally untouchable figure. Well, that myth of invincibility, it has just been absolutely shattered.
Okay, so to really get why this manhunt was so massive, you have to understand the man himself. See, El Mencho wasn't your typical cartel boss, the kind you see in movies obsessed with flashy cars and gold chains. No, this guy was different. He was a cold, calculating military strategist who transformed his entire organization into, well, basically a paramilitary state.
And this right here shows you the fundamental shift in strategy. It's a total game changer. So think about traditional cartels. They operate more like shadow businesses, right? They bribe officials. They try to avoid direct confrontation with the state at all costs. They want to fly under the radar. But El Mencho's organization, the CJNG, they did the exact opposite. They didn't just fight rival gangs. They declared open war on the Mexican government itself. Their goal wasn't just smuggling. It was total territorial control.
And that's not an exaggeration. People started saying this wasn't just a cartel. It was a private army. Because, well, it was. The CJNG wasn't just smuggling drugs. We're talking about them fielding entire convoys of homemade armored monster trucks, actively recruiting ex-Special Forces soldiers, and using military-grade weaponry. They were behaving exactly like an insurgent force, not just some criminal gang.
And their expansion was just terrifyingly fast. I mean, you look at the early 2010s, and the CJNG just explodes across Mexico. But the real moment the world sat up and truly understood the threat they were dealing with was in 2015. They used a rocket-propelled grenade, an RPG, to shoot down a Mexican army helicopter. Think about that. That's not just an attack. That is an act of war. It sent this unbelievably audacious message. We are not hiding anymore. We are in control here.
So you have to ask the question, right? How did a once regional cartel get the money and power to build a private army and literally take on a nation-state? Well, the answer comes down to one thing, a synthetic opioid that changed absolutely everything and made El Mencho the #1 target for the DEA.
Fentanyl. You see, while other cartels were still messing around with bulky, plant-based drugs like cocaine or marijuana, the CJNG completely changed the game. They pioneered this industrial-scale production model for synthetics, and as a business model, it was terrifyingly efficient. Step 1, import super cheap precursor chemicals from China. Step 2, cook them up in these massive super labs in Mexico. And Step 3, flood the American market with a product that was not only incredibly potent, but also insanely profitable. This cash flow, right here, is what funded their entire war machine.
So the second the news of his capture broke, it immediately triggered what experts are calling a narco-insurgency. And what does that mean? It means all across the state of Jalisco, CJNG forces deployed these things called narco-blockades. They used burning vehicles, armed squads, anything they could to completely paralyze entire cities. They were trying to stop the military from moving their captured boss. It's a clear signal. The king might be gone, but his army is very much still fighting.
So that brings us to the big question. How do you even catch a ghost, especially one who commands his own army? Well, the answer is you don't send the police, you send the military. The operation to finally take him down was a testament to the sheer level of threat he posed.
And we had to be really clear about this. This wasn't an arrest. This was a precision strike. Now, that's a term usually reserved for taking out high-value terrorist leaders or enemy commanders in a war zone. The strategy was simple and brutal. Hit the head of the snake with overwhelming speed and force.
In the target itself, it was basically a fortress, a heavily fortified compound tucked deep, deep in the mountains of Jalisco. We're talking remote, inaccessible, and what most people thought was completely impenetrable. He was surrounded by his most loyal soldiers, a ghost in his own private castle. But that's where modern technology pierced the veil. Sources are confirming that Mexican special forces weren't going in blind. They were guided by advanced satellite intelligence, and it's very likely they had some U.S. support on that front. Think about it. They knew exactly where he was, tracking his every move from space before they even thought about launching the final assault.
And the result? There was no long, drawn-out siege, no dramatic, last-minute escape like you see in the movies. The man who had eluded the entire world for over a decade was neutralized in just a matter of minutes. In one single swift operation, the myth of the untouchable ghost was just gone, completely destroyed.
But here's the thing. Taking out the kingpin, that doesn't mean the war is over. In fact, if history has taught us anything, it's that when a figure this powerful falls, it almost always creates a dangerous power vacuum, and that often leads to even more chaos and even more violence.
Because look, the king is gone, but the throne isn't empty, not by a long shot. Right now, as we speak, his lieutenants are scrambling to seize control of those billion-dollar fentanyl routes. At the exact same time, rival organizations, like the Sinaloa cartel, are seeing this as a golden opportunity to move in and claim territory. That's why experts aren't celebrating. They're actually warning us that we may be entering a far more violent chapter as this massive empire splinters apart.
So one man is gone, that's true. But the paramilitary structure he built, that still remains. And you can bet there are 100 ambitious, ruthless leaders ready to take his place. Which leaves us all with a really critical question. Was capturing El Mencho the end of Mexico's cartel war, or was it just the beginning of something new and potentially much, much bloodier? The whole world is watching to see what happens next.